The night air was heavy, and Ethan pushed open the bedroom door with a trembling hand, his heart pounding like war drums. He whispered to himself, "No, this can't be real." Inside, dim light from the bedside lamp painted a cruel picture. His wife Claire was tangled in an embrace with Daniel, the man Ethan once called his brother in every way that mattered. Claire gasped, pulling the sheets closer, but her guilty eyes gave away more than words ever could. Daniel stood, calm and defiant, his lips curling into a smirk that cut deeper than a knife. Ethan said, "You betrayed me in my own home, under my own roof." Claire's tears streamed silently as she reached out, but Ethan stepped back, the floorboards groaning beneath his weight. The room seemed to close in on him, walls pressing tighter, air turning colder. Rage surged like fire in his chest, yet sorrow dragged him down like chains. At that moment, Ethan realized his life was no longer his own. It had been stolen, shattered, and smeared with lies. His voice broke as he whispered, "This isn't the end. It's the beginning of something you'll regret." The door slammed behind Ethan as he staggered into the hallway, each step echoing like thunder. He pressed his palm against the wall, his breath sharp, chest heaving with anger and disbelief. He whispered, "She destroyed everything." The house felt foreign, like an empty shell filled with ghosts of laughter now silenced by betrayal. He stumbled into the living room, collapsing onto the couch, his head buried in his hands. His mind replayed the image of Claire in Daniel's arms, like a cruel film he could not pause. He thought of the years he sacrificed, the trust he nurtured, the love he defended. Now it all lay shattered, broken like glass underfoot. His voice cracked as he muttered, "Why them? Why now?" Tears streamed down, staining his palms, but behind the grief, a spark of something darker began to burn. Ethan lifted his head, eyes red yet focused, whispering, "They will regret this." Morning light crept through the blinds, harsh and unforgiving, illuminating Ethan's weary face. Claire entered the kitchen, her voice trembling. "Please, let me explain." Ethan sat rigid at the table, his coffee untouched, his eyes burning through her every word. He said, "Explain? You destroyed me with him." Claire's lips quivered as she replied, "It was a mistake, I swear." Ethan slammed his fist on the table, rattling the cup, shouting, "A mistake doesn't last months." Silence followed, thick and suffocating, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. Claire collapsed into a chair, tears streaming, while Ethan turned his gaze to the window, unable to look at her. He whispered, "You're a stranger now." Later that day, Ethan walked through the park, his eyes empty, the world a blur around him. He sat on a bench, staring at families laughing nearby, the sound striking him like knives. His phone buzzed, a message from his sister Emily. "I know what they did to you. Meet me tonight." Ethan's grip tightened on the phone, anger flooding anew. He muttered, "They've turned my whole life into ashes." The sky darkened with storm clouds gathering, mirroring his turmoil. He whispered, "This isn't just betrayal, it's war." That night, Ethan met Emily at a dimly lit diner, neon lights flickering outside. Emily, her voice steady but eyes pained, said, "You can't do this alone." Ethan's jaw tightened as he stared at her. "They've taken everything from me." Emily leaned closer, whispering, "Then you take back what's yours, but be smart." Ethan studied her face, the lines of grief etched from their shared past. For the first time, he felt a sliver of guidance, a spark of purpose beyond sorrow. He whispered, "If I fall fighting." Ethan sat alone in his study, shadows stretching across the walls as the lamp flickered faintly. He opened a drawer and pulled out an old journal, pages filled with plans and memories. His hands trembled, but his eyes hardened as he whispered, "They think I'm broken." He flipped through photographs of happier days, every smile now tainted by lies. His heart ached, but rage seared hotter than grief. He slammed the journal shut and whispered, "I'll make them pay." The silence of the house wrapped around him, suffocating and cold. He imagined Claire's voice, once sweet, now venomous in his ears. He whispered to himself, "Every lie will be answered, every wound avenged." For the first time since that night, he felt control returning to his veins, like fire spreading. Ethan rose from his chair, his reflection in the darkened window staring back with hollow eyes, a promise of vengeance. The next evening, Ethan met Lucas in a dim alley near the old train station. Lucas shifted uneasily, his hands buried in his jacket pockets. He muttered, "Ethan, this path won't end well." Ethan's gaze was sharp, his voice low and steady as he replied, "I don't care. They chose this war." Lucas sighed, running a hand through his messy hair, eyes filled with doubt. He said, "You're asking me to cross lines I never thought I would." Ethan stepped closer, whispering, "Then cross them for me." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant rumble of trains. Lucas clenched his jaw, torn between loyalty and fear. At last he nodded reluctantly, muttering, "Fine. But if we burn together." Ethan's lips curved into the faintest smile, though his eyes betrayed the storm within. Meanwhile, Daniel sat in a lavish office downtown, walls lined with expensive art, glass windows overlooking the city. He leaned back in his leather chair, sipping whiskey, his smirk never fading. A business associate across the desk asked, "You're certain Ethan won't interfere?" Daniel's voice was calm, almost mocking as he replied, "Ethan's too weak, he'll drown in his own misery." Yet a flicker of unease crossed his eyes, quickly hidden behind arrogance. He rose, adjusting his tailored suit, staring at the skyline. He muttered under his breath, "He was never strong enough to fight me." The associate left, and Daniel stood alone, glass in hand, savoring the illusion of control. His reflection stared back at him in the glass, calm but hollow. That night, a black SUV idled near a quiet street. Marcus, Daniel's loyal enforcer, stepped out, towering and broad-shouldered, leather jacket creaking as he moved. His eyes scanned the shadows, cold and unyielding. He approached a small shop, owned by one of Ethan's old friends, slamming his fist against the door. When the owner appeared, Marcus growled, "Stay out of Ethan's business, or I'll make sure you regret it." His voice was gravel, steady and threatening. The owner stammered in fear, nodding quickly. Marcus smirked, his duty fulfilled, then walked back into the night. Behind the hardness of his stare, a flicker of doubt lingered, unspoken and buried. Later, Ethan sat across from Emily in her apartment, rain tapping against the window. Emily's voice was quiet, almost pleading, "You're heading down a dangerous road." Ethan's eyes burned as he replied, "They've taken everything, I won't stop now." Emily placed a hand on his, her gaze filled with worry. She whispered, "Revenge will consume you, just like it consumed me once." Oh. Ethan stared at her, confusion flickering across his features. She leaned back, her face shadowed, and said, "I've walked this path before. It nearly destroyed me." Ethan's breath caught as he realized Emily's scars ran deeper than he ever knew. He whispered, "Then help me survive it." Emily's silence was her answer, heavy and foreboding. Ethan sorted files across the table, each paper a shard of truth cutting his fingers with memory. Lucas said, "Bank transfers, shell firms, this is a maze." Ethan replied, "A maze has exits if you map the walls." He opened Claire's archived emails and found hidden folders, named with dates that matched Daniel's trips. Lucas muttered, "He laundered favors into contracts." Ethan said, "And Claire signed the alibis." A receipt showed a hotel under a fake name that Daniel favored. Ethan whispered, "Same floor, same nights, same lies." He cross-matched timestamps with security footage he pulled from a lobby camera. Lucas rubbed his neck and said, "If we push this, Daniel will push back harder." Ethan answered, "Then we push first." He stitched the evidence into a clean timeline, ruthless and neat. He saved a copy to a drive, and slipped another into his jacket. Ethan said, "They built a palace of mirrors." He looked at Lucas and added, "Now we crack the glass and let the shards speak." Lucas paced the narrow kitchen, shoulders tight with dread, while Ethan stacked drives in a small metal case. Lucas said, "I can't be the friend who ruins a life beyond repair." Ethan replied, "You are the friend who stops a life from bleeding out." Lucas stared at the floor and whispered, "Marcus watches me now. I feel him on every corner." Ethan said, "Fear is a map drawn by the enemy." Lucas shook his head and added, "And sometimes it is right." Ethan slid the case shut and said, "Right does not mean final." Lucas leaned on the counter, breath slow, eyes raw. He said, "Promise me you will not cross the line you cannot return from." Ethan replied, "I will not cross alone." The word hung between them like a bridge burning at both ends. Lucas sighed and said, "Then we move, but carefully." Ethan nodded and answered, "Careful like a blade." Daniel stood in a private club, all velvet and hush, while a councilman stirred an untouched drink. The councilman said, "Auditors asked for your vendor list." Daniel replied, "They will receive a curated version." He passed a folder across the table with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Daniel added, "Ethan is unstable, and his accusations will read like fiction." The councilman said, "Fiction sells when the author is wounded." "Maybe." Daniel's jaw flexed and then relaxed. He answered, "I own the bookstore." He texted Marcus and wrote, "Meet the auditor before the meeting meets me." He turned to the window and admired his reflection, as if it were a rival he already defeated. Daniel said, "Control is an instrument. You hold it until it hums." He breathed out, and the room breathed with him, trained and loyal. He whispered, "And every note drowns a scream." Emily unlocked a storage box and set a faded photo on the table, a smile frozen in a year that hurt. Ethan said, "Who is she?" Emily replied, "Maya, the intern Daniel ruined when she refused to falsify numbers." Ethan felt the room tilt as new weight found his spine. Emily said, "He framed her for theft, and she vanished." Ethan asked, "Why did you keep this from me?" Emily answered, "Because I was afraid you would break faster than the truth." She placed a thumb drive beside the photo. Emily said, "This was Maya's last backup. She sent it to me the night before she disappeared." Ethan swallowed and whispered, "He did not just steal my life. He steals breath from people like her." Emily nodded and replied, "Then we breathe for her now." Ethan closed his hand over the drive and said, "Maya will be heard." The promise felt like steel cooling to a blade. Ethan waited in the parking level beneath Daniel's office, concrete sweating with night. Daniel approached, phone to his ear, voice smooth as glass. Ethan stepped from shadow and said, "We need to talk." Daniel lowered the phone and smiled as if greeting a donor. Daniel said, "You look tired, Ethan. Guilt is heavy." Ethan replied, "Truth is heavier, and it still floats." Daniel laughed softly and asked, "Do you have proof or prayers?" Ethan answered, "Enough to light your empire from the basement up." Tires hissed in the distance, and the air smelled of oil and rain. Daniel said, "Careful. You shake a ladder you are still climbing." Ethan stepped closer and whispered, "I brought my own stairs." Daniel's eyes flashed, then cooled. He said, "Then climb, and see who waits at the top." Ethan held his stair and felt the storm gather. Ethan sat in Emily's apartment as she revealed the truth with a trembling voice. Emily said, "Claire knew about Daniel's dealings from the beginning. She helped forge the contracts." Ethan's chest tightened as he whispered, "She was part of it all." Emily nodded and added, "She wasn't just caught in his trap, she was building it beside him." Ethan's vision blurred as the betrayal cut deeper than before. His voice shook as he muttered, "She was my world, and she sold it for lies." Emily said, "I kept this from you because I feared it would break you." Ethan slammed his hand on the table, rage boiling over. He said, "It doesn't break me. It fuels me." Emily looked at him with sorrow and whispered, "Then you are becoming exactly like him." Ethan stared at the drive on the table, whispering, "No, I'll expose them both. They'll burn together." Lucas met Ethan at a rundown motel, neon flickering overhead, his face heavy with doubt. Lucas said, "I can't keep watching you dive deeper. This isn't you anymore." Ethan's jaw tightened as he replied, "It's me now. You either stand with me or walk away." Lucas ran a hand through his hair, pacing nervously. He muttered, "You're not chasing justice anymore, you're chasing blood." Ethan stepped closer and whispered, "Blood is all they left me with." Lucas stopped pacing and looked him in the eyes, torn between loyalty and fear. He whispered, "If you go down, I go down with you. But know this, Ethan. You're burning the last bridge you have." Ethan said, "Then I'll build my own bridge from the ashes." Silence wrapped around them, broken only by the buzz of the neon light. Marcus stood alone in Daniel's office late at night, files spread before him. His brow furrowed as he read the contracts, each one dirtier than the last. He muttered, "How much blood has been spilled for this empire?" His phone buzzed with Daniel's message, "Keep Ethan out of sight, permanently." Marcus's chest tightened. He whispered, "I signed on for loyalty, not murder." He looked at his reflection in the glass window, haunted by the choices that chained him. A memory flickered in his mind of Ethan's kindness years ago, back when they were both nothing but men struggling for survival. Marcus clenched the phone in his hand, torn between duty and conscience. He muttered, "Maybe loyalty isn't to Daniel anymore." He shut the files, his jaw set with unspoken decision. Emily found Ethan pacing outside the diner where they first met, after the betrayal. She said, "You're letting the darkness eat you alive." Ethan turned, his eyes blazing, and replied, "Darkness is the only weapon they fear." Emily stepped closer, her voice urgent. "But if you lose yourself, there's no victory left to claim." Ethan shook his head and said, "I don't care about victory. I care about making them choke on their lies." Emily placed her hand on his arm and whispered, "Then you'll destroy yourself before they ever can." Ethan pulled away, voice low and sharp, "Better I burn with purpose than live in chains." Emily's eyes shimmered with grief as she whispered, "Then you're already lost." Ethan's silence was louder than her words, his breath fogging in the cold night. Ethan sat in the shadows of an abandoned warehouse, plans spread out under a single hanging light. His face was drawn, determination carved into every line. He whispered, "No more hesitation." Lucas entered, his steps hesitant, and said, "What are you planning?" Ethan looked up and replied, "The only thing that will end this, taking them head on." Lucas's eyes widened as he muttered, "That's suicide." Ethan leaned forward, his voice steady, "It's justice." Emily arrived moments later, her eyes filled with dread. She said, "You're standing at the edge, Ethan. Step back." Ethan shook his head and whispered, "There's no back left to step to, only forward." The silence of the warehouse wrapped around them, heavy and final. Ethan's stare burned with resolve, unshaken, unyielding. Ethan walked into Daniel's charity gala dressed in a borrowed suit, the chandeliers blazing above him like false suns. He whispered to Lucas, "Every mask hides a crime tonight." Lucas muttered back, "You're playing with fire." Ethan slipped a flash drive to a disguised waiter, who nodded and vanished toward the stage control booth. Claire appeared across the hall in a crimson gown, her eyes locking onto Ethan with shock. She mouthed, "Leave now." Ethan ignored her and whispered, "Tonight the curtains fall." As Daniel raised his glass at the podium, Ethan whispered under his breath, "And the truth will drink with him." The music swelled, but Ethan's pulse was louder, a war drum inside his chest. He clenched his jaw and muttered, "This is where the empire cracks." Backstage, Lucas cornered Ethan with desperation in his voice. He said, "You planted the files in the main feed? That exposes him, but it also paints a target on your back." Ethan's eyes burned as he replied, "Targets don't scare me. Silence does." Lucas shook his head and muttered, "You're becoming him." Ethan snapped back, "I'm ending him." Lucas' shoulders slumped as he whispered, "I hope you know the line you just crossed." Ethan looked toward the stage where Daniel was about to speak. He muttered, "Lines are for men who want to stay safe. I want justice." Lucas turned away, his face shadowed by regret. The weight of the plan pressed down like the ceiling itself, and Ethan felt both invincible and doomed. Across town, Marcus sat in his car outside the gala, phone buzzing with Daniel's instructions. Daniel's voice crackled. Make sure Ethan doesn't leave alive. Marcus stared at the screen, silence heavy. He muttered, "You use loyalty like a leash." He glanced at the pistol on the passenger seat, his jaw clenched. Memories of Ethan years ago surfaced, the man who once gave him a job when no one else would. Marcus whispered, "Maybe I owe him more than I owe you." He placed the pistol back in the glove box and slammed it shut. He muttered, "Not tonight." The choice carved itself into his soul, and for the first time in years, Marcus felt the leash snap. He started the car and whispered, "I'll decide where my loyalty goes now." Inside the gala, Daniel's perfect composure cracked as the screens behind him flickered. Ethan's planted files began rolling across the monitors. Contracts, bank transfers, signatures. Gasps filled the ballroom. Daniel slammed the podium and shouted, "This is a fabrication." Claire's face turned pale, her secret lay bare before the world. Ethan stepped out of the shadows and said loudly, "The truth doesn't need permission to speak." Guests whispered, scandal spreading like fire. Daniel's eyes locked on Ethan, fury burning. He shouted, "You'll regret this." Ethan replied, "Not as much as you will." The crowd's eyes darted between them, tension choking the air. Daniel's empire was unraveling in real time, and Ethan felt the tide finally shift. Later that night, Ethan stood in the empty warehouse again, Emily waiting in silence. She said, "You've revealed the truth, but the cost is rising." Ethan rubbed his temples and whispered, "Cost doesn't matter when everything is already gone." Emily stepped closer, her voice soft, "You're losing yourself in this fire." Ethan turned, eyes cold, and replied, "Better to be lost than silenced." She whispered, "And what if vengeance turns hollow?" Ethan picked up the drive again, his hand steady, and said, "Then I'll carry the hollow with me, as long as they are buried beneath it." The storm outside cracked with thunder, echoing the storm inside his chest. Emily closed her eyes, whispering, "Then God help us all." Ethan waited inside the abandoned factory, rain leaking through rusted beams, his fists clenched. Daniel entered with guards, his smirk sharp in the dim light. Ethan said, "You built your empire on ashes." Daniel replied, "And you'll burn in it." Ethan stepped forward, his voice low, "I brought the truth. Tonight it ends." Daniel raised his hand, and the guards moved closer, but Marcus appeared from the shadows. Marcus said, "Not tonight." Daniel's eyes narrowed, betrayal slicing through his composure. Ethan's heart thundered, but his voice stayed calm. "This is your reckoning, Daniel." The factory creaked like bones as the storm outside screamed louder. Daniel's voice thundered, "You think one traitor changes anything?" Ethan's jaw tightened as he replied, "One truth destroys every lie." Marcus leveled his glare at Daniel, his tone low, "I followed orders until orders became murder." Daniel's expression cracked, fury seething beneath his charm. Ethan said, "Your empire rots because it's built on corpses." Daniel's guards hesitated, doubt clouding their eyes as Marcus stepped closer. Daniel shouted, "He's bluffing! End him!" Ethan raised the flash drive and said, "Every name, every deal, every crime, it's all here." The guards faltered, silence suffocating the air. Daniel's control slipped, and the storm inside the factory grew louder. Daniel lunged, his fist swinging with rage, but Ethan ducked and countered, their fight erupting like thunder. Steel beams echoed each blow as they clashed, each strike fueled by years of betrayal. Daniel shouted, "You were always weak." Ethan roared back, "Weak men don't survive lies this long." Daniel slammed Ethan against a pillar. Ethan's breath knocked out, but fire still burned in his eyes. Ethan countered with a headbutt, blood smearing both men's faces. Their grunts and cries merged with the storm outside, every hit like lightning striking steel. Ethan's knuckles split, Daniel's suit tore, but neither relented. It was no longer just fists. It was truth, and lies colliding in flesh. Marcus stepped forward, gun drawn, aiming at Daniel as the two men staggered apart. Ethan, panting, shouted, "Don't kill him. We need him to face it." Marcus' eyes flickered with conflict, his grip tight on the weapon. Daniel sneered, blood on his lips. "You'll never make me stand trial. I'll bury you all first." Emily suddenly entered, her voice sharp. "Enough!" Her presence froze the room, her eyes locking on Ethan. She said, "If you kill him, you lose everything you are." Ethan's chest heaved, torn between vengeance and justice. Marcus lowered the gun slowly, his voice rough. Maybe the truth should kill him instead. Daniel dropped to his knees, laughter spilling through his blood. He muttered, "Expose me, and you'll expose yourself." Claire was in every signature. Ethan's heart cracked as truth stabbed deeper. He whispered, "She chose you over me, but I'll choose truth over both of you." Emily's eyes softened as she said, "Then do it, Ethan. End it the right way." Ethan pulled out the drive, holding it high under the flickering light. He said, "This is the end of your empire." Daniel's laughter faltered, his smirk finally fading as the storm roared outside. Ethan whispered, "And the beginning of my freedom." The storm subsided, leaving the factory filled with silence broken only by dripping water. Daniel was dragged away by his own guards, their loyalty broken by the weight of evidence. Ethan watched, his face torn between victory and exhaustion. Emily whispered, "It's over, Ethan." He shook his head slowly and replied, "No, it's never truly over, but the chains are broken." Marcus stood in the shadows, lowering his gaze, torn but relieved. Daniel shouted as he was pulled out, "You'll never be free of me." Ethan whispered, "I already am." The night outside felt colder but clearer, like a wound beginning to close, leaving only scars behind. Later that morning, Ethan sat alone on a park bench, the city alive around him. Families laughed, joggers passed, and life moved forward, indifferent to his war. He whispered, "The world doesn't stop for one man's revenge." His hands trembled as he pulled the flash drive from his pocket. He muttered, "This holds the story they never wanted told." A child's laughter made him look up, and for the first time in years, his lips curved into the faintest smile. He whispered, "Maybe there's something left to save in me." Yet behind the smile lingered shadows that would never leave. Emily sat across from Ethan at the diner, her voice gentle but firm. She said, "You won, but the cost was high." Ethan stirred his coffee without drinking and replied, "Winning feels empty when the people you loved are gone." Emily reached across the table, her hand resting on his, whispering, "You're still here, and that means something." Ethan looked at her, his eyes hollow but alive, and said, "Then maybe I'll learn to live again, one breath at a time." Emily smiled faintly, though sorrow weighed heavy in her gaze. They sat in silence, the neon glow flickering above them, two souls bound by pain, but tethered to survival. Lucas arrived quietly, standing at the diner entrance before approaching. He said, "I thought you'd be gone." Ethan looked up, his eyes softer than before, and replied, "I thought so too." Lucas sat down slowly, his shoulders still tense with guilt. He muttered, "I doubted you when it mattered most." Ethan shook his head and said, "You were the voice I needed to hear, even if I didn't listen." Lucas exhaled, a weight lifting, and whispered, "Then maybe I wasn't just your shadow after all." Ethan smiled faintly and said, "No, you were the reason I didn't fall completely." For the first time, the three of them, Ethan, Emily, and Lucas, sat together in fragile peace. That night, Ethan stood alone on a rooftop overlooking the city, the skyline glowing against the dark. He whispered, "Revenge took everything, but it gave me clarity." Wind whipped his jacket as he gazed at the streets below, alive with endless stories. He muttered, "I'll never erase the scars, but I'll carry them as proof I survived." The silence of the night echoed like a final sentence. Ethan closed his eyes and whispered, "This chapter ends, but I am still here." With that, he turned away, walking into the shadows, the city lights burning behind him like both fire and hope.